The howling winds of that terrible winter still echo through the generations of those who survived it. Imagine being stranded in a small wooden cabin as temperatures plummet far below zero, your food supplies dwindling day by day, your children's hungry eyes looking to you for salvation that seems increasingly impossible. This is the story of Rebecca Miller, a woman who faced the unforgiving Dakota winter of 1868 with nothing but courage and 3 young children depending on her, and the unexpected alliance that would challenge everything both sides thought they knew about one another. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The small settlement of Pinecrest clung to the edge of the frontier in Dakota Territory, a collection of wooden buildings and determined souls carving out an existence in a land that demanded constant vigilance. The winter of 1868 had descended with unprecedented fury, burying the landscape in snow so deep that houses were nearly swallowed whole, and temperatures so cruel that cattle froze where they stood. For those who called this unforgiving terrain home, survival during winter months wasn't just challenging, it was an everyday battle against nature itself. Rebecca Miller knew this battle intimately. At 32, her face already carried the weathered lines of frontier hardship, her blue eyes retaining a fierce light that refused to dim despite all she had endured. Just 8 months earlier, she had buried her husband John after a logging accident, left her alone with 3 children. Emma, a solemn 10-year-old with her father's determined chin. Thomas, 8 years old and constantly trying to be the man of the house despite his tender age, and little Sarah, barely 5, who still asked when Papa was coming home. The Miller homestead sat nearly 5 miles from town, a distance that seemed negligible during fair weather but became treacherous when winter storms raged. Their small farm had yielded enough harvest to get through a normal winter, but this season had arrived early and with unusual ferocity. Rebecca had rationed their supplies carefully, but as January's icy grip tightened, she calculated they had perhaps 2 weeks of food remaining, if they ate sparingly. In Pinecrest, Rebecca's situation was viewed with a mixture of pity and judgment. A woman has no business trying to maintain a homestead alone, Mayor Harold Thompson would say to knowing nods at town meetings. Those poor children deserve proper raising in a proper household. The implications were clear. Rebecca should sell the land, admit defeat, and let one of the respectable families in town take in her children as laborers or servants under the guise of charity. But Rebecca had promised John as he lay dying that she would keep their family together and their land intact. This was their future, the inheritance meant for their children. She would not surrender it easily, despite the whispers that followed her through town whenever she arrived for supplies. "She's too proud for her own good," Mrs. Elizabeth Garrett, the shopkeeper's wife, would mutter to the other women. "Pride won't feed those children when the food runs out." Only Dr. William Anderson remained consistently kind, occasionally bringing extra supplies left over from other patients when he visited to check on young Sarah's persistent cough. "You're doing fine, Rebecca," he would say, his elderly eyes crinkling with genuine concern. "This town forgets too quickly what true strength looks like." The blizzard began on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky darkening to an ominous gray before unleashing its fury. Rebecca had just returned from collecting firewood when the first heavy flakes began to fall. Within hours, the wind was screaming around their cabin, finding every crack and crevice to push its icy fingers through. For 3 days, the storm raged without pause, piling snow against the doors and windows until they were entombed in white. When the skies finally cleared, Rebecca emerged to find their world transformed into a frozen wasteland. The woodpile was nearly buried, the barn half collapsed under the snow's weight. Worse still, the smokehouse had been damaged, and most of Their remaining meat stores were ruined by moisture and exposure. "We need to go to town," Rebecca announced that evening, fighting to keep her voice steady as Emma helped her inventory what little food remained. "But Mama, the snow's too deep," Emma protested, her young face grave with understanding beyond her years. "We don't have a choice anymore," Rebecca replied softly, not wanting Thomas and Sarah to hear the fear she couldn't quite disguise. "We have food for perhaps 5 days, and that's with all of us eating barely enough to stay alive." That night, after the children were asleep, Rebecca sat by the dying embers of their fire and faced the truth she had been avoiding. They might not survive this winter. Their situation had moved beyond difficult into desperate. The journey to town would be perilous, but staying meant certain starvation. She had to risk everything on one desperate gamble for her children's lives. Dawn brought clear skies and merciless cold. Rebecca dressed the children in every layer they possessed, wrapping their feet in strips of blanket before pushing them into boots. She packed their few remaining provisions, loaded a small hand sled with necessities, and prepared for the journey. "We're going to walk to town," she explained, forcing brightness into her voice. "It's an adventure. We need to stay together and keep moving." The first mile was manageable despite the deep snow, their determination providing warmth and energy. Rebecca pulled the sled with Sarah riding atop their meager belongings, while Emma and Thomas trudged alongside. They followed the path of the buried road, recognizable only by the absence of trees. By the second mile, the wind had picked up again, cutting through their layers and stealing their breath. Thomas stumbled frequently, his small legs struggling, through snowdrifts that sometimes reached his chest. Rebecca began carrying him for stretches, her muscles burning with the effort of managing both a child and the sled. Halfway through the third mile, disaster struck. The wind had sculpted the snow into deceptive shapes, and what appeared to be solid ground was actually a snow bridge over a small ravine. When Rebecca stepped onto it, the snow collapsed, sending her tumbling down a 6-foot drop. She cried out as pain lanced through her leg, terrifying the children who stood at the edge above. "Mama!" Emma screamed, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Rebecca gritted her teeth against the pain, attempting to stand only to collapse again. Looking down, she saw the unnatural angle of her ankle and knew with sickening certainty that it was broken. They were 3 miles from town, the temperature was dropping with the sun, and she could no longer walk. "Emma," she called up, fighting to keep her voice calm. "Take Thomas and Sarah and keep going toward town. Follow the road. Tell Dr. Anderson where I am." Emma's face contorted with fear. "I can't leave you." "You have to," Rebecca insisted. "It's getting dark. You need to get help." "I won't go," Thomas declared, his small voice breaking. "Papa said I'm the man now. I won't leave you alone." In that moment, as the cruel reality of their situation settled over her, Rebecca felt true despair. They couldn't continue, couldn't go back, couldn't survive the night exposed to the elements. She had led her children into a death trap, and there was no escape. As darkness began to fall, Rebecca made a desperate decision. They would dig a shelter in the snowbank, using techniques she had heard trappers discuss. It wouldn't be enough for long, but it might keep them alive through the night. With Emma's help, she managed to climb out of the ravine, her teeth clenched, against the agony in her ankle. For an hour, they worked to hollow out a space in a large snowdrift, packing the walls firm. Rebecca placed their blankets inside, then ushered the exhausted children into the makeshift shelter. She positioned herself at the entrance, using her body to block the wind, while maintaining a small opening for air. As night descended fully, the temperature plummeted further. Inside their snow cave, the children huddled against Rebecca for warmth, their small bodies shivering despite the layers. She told stories of spring, of flowers and warm sunshine, trying to distract them from hunger and cold. Eventually, They drifted into fitful sleep while she remained awake, fighting the dangerous drowsiness that beckoned. Rebecca knew the signs of freezing to death. The trappers spoke of it sometimes, how the cold eventually feels like warmth, how sleep becomes irresistible. As her own eyelids grew heavy, she pinched herself repeatedly, bit her lips until she tasted blood, anything to stay alert. But the combination of pain, cold, and exhaustion was overwhelming, and eventually her vigilance faltered. She woke to the sound of voices, not the wind, but actual human voices. For a moment, Rebecca thought she was dreaming, or worse, hallucinating, as her body surrendered to the cold. Then she heard the soft crunch of snow under moccasined feet, and her eyes flew open. Silhouetted against the night sky stood 4 figures, their breath visible in the moonlight. As her vision adjusted, Rebecca realized with a jolt of fear that they were Sioux warriors, their faces painted for winter hunting, their bodies wrapped in fur and leather against the cold. The tallest of them crouched down, peering into the snow shelter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His dark eyes met Rebecca's, and she instinctively pulled her children closer, though she knew she could offer no real protection. The children woke, Sarah whimpering in fear at the sight of the warriors. Rebecca had heard the stories that circulated in town, tales of raids and violence that painted all native peoples as savages to be feared. But she had also heard John speak differently, telling of encounters with Sioux who traded fairly and respected boundaries. In this moment, suspended between life and death, she could only hope the men before her were of the latter kind. The leader spoke in his native language to the others, then in halting English to Rebecca. "Why here? No place for woman, children." Rebecca swallowed her fear and answered truthfully. "Our home had no more food. We were trying to reach town. I fell. My leg is broken. We can't go on." The warrior studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he conferred again with his companions. Rebecca could make out nothing of their discussion, but she saw one gesture toward the north, another toward her children. Finally, the leader turned back to her. "We take." "Take what?" Rebecca asked, fear spiking through her again. "Take you," he clarified, pointing to all of them. "Our winter camp. Not far. Here." He swept his arm to indicate their snow shelter. "You die." It wasn't a question or an offer, but a statement of fact. And he was right. They would not survive another day in their makeshift shelter. Rebecca faced an impossible choice. Trust these warriors or face certain death. "My children," she said, her voice strengthening with maternal protection. "You won't harm them?" The warrior's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps respect, perhaps simply understanding. "No harm, children. This promise." Rebecca looked at Emma, whose eyes were wide with fear, but who gave a small, brave nod. She looked at Thomas, trying to appear stoic despite his trembling. She looked at Sarah, too young to understand fully, but old enough to be terrified. Then she looked back at the warrior. "We will go with you," she said. The next moments passed in a blur of activity. The warriors efficiently dismantled the snow shelter, wrapped Rebecca in an extra fur, and fashioned a travois from branches and leather. 2 warriors lifted her onto it, while the others gathered her children and their few belongings. "I am Fast Eagle," the leader told her as they prepared to move. He pointed to the others in turn. "Running Fox, Silent Wolf, Eagle." "I." Rebecca nodded, clinging to this small human connection. "I am Rebecca, my children Emma, Thomas, Sarah." Fast Eagle acknowledged this with a nod, then gave instructions to his companions. Soon they were moving through the darkness. Rebecca, lying on the travois, being pulled by Fast Eagle. her children walking between the other warriors, who occasionally carried the youngest when she stumbled. They traveled for what seemed hours, but was perhaps only one, moving steadily through the snow with a confidence that spoke of intimate knowledge of the land. Eventually, they descended into a sheltered valley where the wind died significantly. In the moonlight, Rebecca could make out several hide lodges, teepees arranged in a semicircle, smoke rising from their tops. Their arrival caused immediate stir within the camp. Women emerged from the lodges, children peeked out curiously, and several older men approached Fast Eagle with questioning expressions. Again, there was conversation Rebecca couldn't understand, Fast Eagle gesturing toward her and the children. As he explained their presence, an elderly woman approached, her face deeply lined, but her movements still spry. She examined Rebecca briefly, focusing on the injured ankle, then spoke to Fast Eagle with authority. He nodded and directed the warriors to bring Rebecca to a lodge near the center of the camp. Inside, the difference between the teepee and their snow shelter was profound. A fire burned in a central pit, the smoke rising to an opening at the top. Furs covered the ground, and various implements for cooking and living hung from the supporting poles. Most importantly, it was warm. Gloriously, life-savingly warm. The elderly woman, who Fast Eagle called Medicine Woman, immediately set to work on Rebecca's ankle. Her touch was sure but gentle as she examined the injury, then prepared a poultice of herbs and applied it before binding the ankle with leather strips. The pain remained, but something in the herbs brought a numbing relief that allowed Rebecca to think clearly again. Meanwhile, other women brought food, a rich stew of meat and roots that they first fed to the children, whose hunger overcame their fear. Rebecca watched in disbelief as Sarah, normally shy with strangers, accepted a second helping from a young Sioux woman who smiled at the child's eagerness. As the immediate crisis of survival ebbed, new concerns flooded Rebecca's mind. What would happen to them now? When would they be permitted to leave? What would the people of Pinecrest think when they failed to arrive? Would someone come searching? And if so, what would happen when they encountered the Sioux camp? But these worries, legitimate as they were, couldn't overshadow the overwhelming fact: they were alive. When death had seemed certain, these people, whom the town spoke of with fear and hatred, had saved them without hesitation. Fast Eagle entered the lodge later, after the children had fallen asleep on soft furs, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. He sat across the fire from Rebecca, his face solemn in the flickering light. "Why you alone?" he asked. "No man." Rebecca hesitated, then decided that honesty was the only path forward. "My husband died last spring. A tree fell wrong while he was cutting wood." Fast Eagle nodded, understanding crossing his features. "Hard winter for a lone woman." "Yes," Rebecca agreed, her throat tight with unshed tears. "Very hard." "You stay until leg heals," he said, not a question but a statement. "Not safe before." Rebecca knew he was right. She couldn't travel on her broken ankle, and returning to their homestead wasn't an option with their food gone. "Thank you," she said simply. Fast Eagle studied her for a moment longer. "Your people and my people." He made a gesture of conflict with his hands. "But children don't choose. Winter doesn't ask who is Sioux, who is white. Cold kills all same." With those words, he left, leaving Rebecca to contemplate this unexpected turn in their desperate journey. As she watched her children sleeping peacefully under the protection of those they had been taught to fear, Rebecca felt the first flickering of something she had nearly forgotten: hope. What she didn't yet know was that this night marked only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything she thought she understood about survival, community, and the artificial boundaries between peoples who shared the same harsh land. The winter had nearly claimed their lives, But in saving them, the Sioux warriors had set in motion events that would transform not only the Miller family, but eventually the entire region in ways no one could have predicted. Days in the Sioux. Camp passed with a rhythm entirely different from life at the homestead. Rebecca woke each morning to the sounds of the camp coming alive. Women stoking fires, children's voices, men preparing for hunting. Medicine woman visited regularly, changing the poultice on Rebecca's ankle and communicating through gestures and the few English words she knew. The elderly healer's weathered hands worked with practiced confidence, and despite the language barrier, Rebecca found herself trusting the woman's expertise. The children adapted with the remarkable resilience of youth. By the third day, Thomas was following a group of Sioux boys who had taken to teaching him how to set small snares for rabbits. Though he returned to Rebecca's side frequently, his eyes shone with excitement when he described his new skills. Little Sarah had become the camp's collective treasure, passed among the women who braided her blonde hair, taught her simple words in their language, and slipped her extra treats of dried berries and honey. Even Emma, cautious and protective by nature, had begun assisting a young Sioux woman named Morning Sky with daily chores, learning to scrape hides and watching intently as she worked intricate beadwork designs. The lodge they occupied belonged to Fast Eagle's mother, an elderly but vigorous woman named Sitting Dove, who had welcomed them with quiet dignity. Rebecca later learned through halting translations that Fast Eagle's wife had died 2 winters ago during childbirth, leaving him to raise their son, a serious 6-year-old named Little Fox, who often sat silently observing the Miller children. Rebecca struggled most with the enforced idleness her injury created. Accustomed to constant work, the never-ending tasks of maintaining a homestead, raising 3 children, and battling the elements, she found herself restless despite her gratitude. Noticing this, Sitting Dove brought her materials for beadwork, and with infinite patience demonstrated the techniques. Rebecca's first attempts were clumsy, but the detailed work provided focus and purpose during the long hours when the children were occupied elsewhere. One afternoon, as Rebecca worked on a simple pattern, Fast Eagle entered the lodge. He watched her work for several moments before speaking. "Your town," he said, his English deliberate but improving through their interactions. "They look for you." The question had haunted Rebecca since their arrival. Surely someone would notice their absence. Dr. Anderson, perhaps, who had promised to visit Sarah again, or the shopkeeper expecting payment for their last supplies. "Yes," she replied, setting aside the beadwork. "When we don't arrive in town, they will look." Fast Eagle nodded, his expression grave. "Snow stops. Men can travel now. My scouts see white men, 6, maybe 7, with guns. They follow old tracks." Rebecca's heart raced. A search party from Pinecrest could mean rescue, return to their community, proper medical care, their own home eventually. But looking at Fast Eagle's face, she realized the situation contained dangers she hadn't considered. "Your people and mine," she said slowly, echoing his earlier words. "There is no trust between them." "No trust," he agreed. "They see white. Woman, white children in Sioux camp." He made a slashing gesture that needed no translation. The implications were clear. The men from town, finding them in the Sioux camp, might assume they'd been captured rather than rescued. They would see enemies, not saviors. The resulting confrontation could turn violent, endangering everyone. The search party, the Sioux, and perhaps even Rebecca and her children caught in between. "What can we do?" she asked. Fast Eagle considered for a moment. "I take 2 men. We find search party. I speak to them, tell them you are safe, ankle broken. They can come, few men only, no guns." It was a risk, a significant one. The men from town might shoot first, especially upon encountering Sioux warriors in the wilderness. The thought turned Rebecca's blood cold. "No," she said finally, "it's too dangerous. Let me go to them instead." Fast Eagle's brow furrowed. "You cannot walk. I can if you help me. We take a travois to the edge of the valley. I meet them there, alone. I'll explain everything." Fast Eagle studied her face, seeming to weigh her determination against his concern. "You trust these men? They listen to woman." Rebecca hesitated. Trust was complicated. She trusted Dr. Anderson, certainly, but if Mayor Thompson led the search party, his long-standing disapproval of her independence might color his judgment. Still, appearing alone would diffuse the immediate tension better than any alternative. "Some will listen," she said finally, "and those who won't listen to me might still hesitate to harm a white woman." The plan took shape quickly. The scouts reported the search party camped 3 miles north, likely to reach the valley by the following afternoon. At dawn, Fast Eagle and Running Fox helped Rebecca onto a travois and began the journey to an overlook at the valley's edge. Emma insisted on accompanying them, her young face set with determination that brooked no argument. Rebecca reluctantly agreed, knowing her daughter's presence might help convince the search party of their safety. The journey was painful, despite Medicine Woman's herbs. Each jolt of the travois sent spikes of agony through Rebecca's ankle, but she bit her lip and endured. By mid-morning, they reached the designated spot, a small clearing atop a rise that provided clear views in all directions. "We wait here," Fast Eagle said, helping Rebecca to sit with her back against a tree. "They come from there." He pointed northward, where the land dipped and rose in rolling hills now covered in blinding white. The waiting stretched on, each passing hour increasing Rebecca's anxiety. What if the scouts had been mistaken? What if the search party had turned back or changed direction? Worse, what if they approached from another angle and encountered the Sioux camp directly? Emma sat close beside her, occasionally scanning the horizon. "What will we tell them, Mama?" she asked softly. "The truth," Rebecca replied. "That we were dying and the Sioux saved us. Will they believe it?" Emma's question reflected wisdom beyond her years, an understanding of how deeply prejudice ran in Pinecrest. "Some will," Rebecca said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "Dr. Anderson will." Just past noon, Fast Eagle tensed, his keen eyes spotting movement long before Rebecca could discern anything. "They come," he said, pointing to a distant ridge where dark figures had appeared against the snow. "You should go," Rebecca told him, sudden fear for his safety overwhelming her. "If they see you—" Fast Eagle shook his head. "We stay hidden, close, watch." He gestured to the dense pines 30 yards behind them. "If danger comes, we help." Without waiting for response, he and Running Fox melted into the trees with silent efficiency that reminded Rebecca how little she truly understood about these people who had saved her family. The search party drew steadily closer. 7 men on horseback moving carefully through the deep snow. As they came within clear view, Rebecca recognized Dr. Anderson at the lead, followed by the blacksmith and several farmers. Mayor Thompson rode near the rear, his distinctive bulk unmistakable even at a distance. They hadn't yet spotted the lone woman and child at the edge of the clearing. "Hello," Rebecca called, her voice carrying across the stillness. "Dr. Anderson, we're here." The party jerked to a halt, rifles immediately raised as they scanned for the source of the voice. Dr. Anderson was the first to spot them, spurring his horse forward with an exclamation of surprise. "Rebecca? Emma?" he called, relief evident even at a distance. "Thank God!" The others followed more cautiously, and Rebecca noted they kept their rifles ready. As they approached, the expressions ranged from relief to suspicion. "Mrs. Miller," Mayor Thompson said, his tone formal and cool despite the circumstances, We feared the worst when you failed to reach town. Where are Thomas and Sarah?" "They're safe," Rebecca assured them quickly. "My ankle is broken. We nearly died in the storm, but we were rescued." "Rescued?" the blacksmith echoed, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. "By whom?" The critical moment had arrived. Rebecca took a deep breath, acutely aware of Fast Eagle and Running Fox hidden nearby, of her children back at the camp, of all that hung in the balance of her next words. "Sioux hunters found us freezing to death," she said clearly. "They took us to their winter camp and have cared for us. Thomas and Sarah are there now, warm and well-fed. The tribe's healer has been treating my broken ankle." A shocked silence followed her statement, broken finally by Mayor Thompson's incredulous voice. "Are you saying savages have your children?" Rebecca's spine stiffened. "I'm saying honorable people saved our lives when we were hours from death. My children are safer and healthier than they've been in months." "She's confused from the cold," one farmer muttered, "or they've addled her mind somehow." "I'm perfectly sound of mind, Mr. Jenkins," Rebecca retorted sharply. "The Sioux have shown us nothing but kindness." Dr. Anderson dismounted, approaching, Rebecca with medical concern rather than judgment. He knelt beside her, examining her color and eyes before glancing at the crude but effective splint on her ankle. "The work on this leg is good," he said finally, looking up with a thoughtful expression. "Primitive methods, but knowledgeable." "Their healer is skilled," Rebecca confirmed. "Her poultices have kept the swelling down and managed the pain." Mayor Thompson also dismounted, his heavy boots crunching in the snow as he loomed over them. "This is madness. We'll collect the children and return to town immediately." "The Sioux camp is 2 hours from here," Rebecca explained, trying to keep frustration from her voice. "I can't walk. The children can't travel through deep snow for 5 miles. We need to wait until my ankle heals enough for travel." "We'll send men for the children," Thompson insisted. "You can ride with Dr. Anderson." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "I won't send armed men into a peaceful camp that has sheltered my family. The Sioux are justifiably wary of white men with guns." Thompson's face darkened. "You don't give orders. Here, Mrs. Miller, we haven't traveled for days through this godforsaken snow to leave without those children." Dr. Anderson intervened, his elderly voice carrying surprising authority. "Harold, perhaps we should listen to Rebecca. If the Sioux meant harm, they've had ample opportunity." "You're being naive, William," Thompson snapped. "They're obviously holding them hostage, using the woman to lure us in." Emma, who had remained silent until now, stood suddenly, her small figure somehow commanding attention. "They saved us," she said, her voice clear and unafraid. "We were dying in the snow. Fast Eagle carried me when I couldn't walk anymore. The women feed us and tell us stories. Little Fox gave Thomas his own bow." Her eyes flashed with a fire Rebecca recognized as her own. "They're not savages. You are, if you bring guns to hurt them." The men stared at the child, astonishment evident on their faces. Emma had always been reserved in town, hiding behind Rebecca's skirts during their infrequent visits. This fierce, articulate defense from a 10-year-old girl seemed to penetrate where Rebecca's words had failed. Dr. Anderson's weather-lined face creased in a small smile. "Well said, young lady." He turned to the others. "I suggest we make camp nearby. Send 2 men, unarmed, with Rebecca and Emma back to the Sioux camp to see the situation for themselves. They can return with a full report, and we'll decide on a course of action." Thompson began to protest, but the blacksmith nodded slowly. "Seems reasonable. I'll go." "As will I," Dr. Anderson added. "The rest of you make camp and wait for our return." The compromise wasn't perfect, but Rebecca felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. Dr. Anderson's presence would help ensure a peaceful assessment. Still, she worried about how the Sioux would receive even 2 white men entering their camp. As the other men began setting up camp 50 yards away, Dr. Anderson helped Rebecca back onto the travois they had brought. The blacksmith, Mr. Garner, looked uncomfortable but determined as he prepared to accompany them. "The Sioux are watching us," Rebecca said quietly to Dr. Anderson. "They stayed nearby to protect us if needed." The doctor nodded, unsurprised. "I suspected as much. You should call them out so we can proceed without misunderstanding." Rebecca hesitated, then called out in a clear voice, "Fast Eagle, it's safe now. These men will come with me." For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then Fast Eagle and Running Fox emerged from the trees, moving with deliberate slowness, their hands empty of weapons, but their posture alert. Dr. Anderson stiffened beside her, but made no threatening moves. Mr. Garner's hand twitched toward where his gun would normally hang, but finding himself unarmed as agreed, he simply watched warily. Fast Eagle approached, his dark eyes assessing the two white men before turning to Rebecca. "These men come to camp?" "Yes," Rebecca confirmed. "Dr. Anderson is a healer. He has helped my family many times. Mr. Garner is from town. They want to see that Thomas and Sarah are safe, no weapons." Fast Eagle considered this, then spoke to Running Fox in their language. The younger warrior nodded and disappeared back into the trees, heading for the camp, Rebecca presumed, to alert them of the coming visitors. "We go," Fast Eagle said simply, moving to take up the handles of the travois. Dr. Anderson stepped forward. "If I may, I'd like to examine Mrs. Miller's injury before we travel." When Fast Eagle nodded permission, the doctor knelt again beside Rebecca, this time taking more care with his examination of the ankle. "Broken, certainly," he murmured, "but well tended. The alignment is good. Whoever set this knew their business." The journey back to the Sioux camp proceeded in uncomfortable silence. Fast Eagle and Dr. Anderson pulled the travois while Mr. Garner walked alongside, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings with obvious nervousness. Emma walked close to Rebecca, occasionally whispering reassurances about Thomas and Sarah. As they crested the final rise before the valley, the Sioux camp came into view below. Smoke rose from the teepees in gray columns against the white landscape. People moved about the central area, and children played near the closest lodges. It looked, Rebecca realized, remarkably similar to Pinecrest on a winter day, simply a community going about its daily life. Dr. Anderson paused, taking in the scene with thoughtful eyes. "Impressive winter camp," he noted. "Well situated out of the wind, near water and game trails." Mr. Garner seemed less impressed. "Where are they keeping the children?" he demanded, his voice tight with suspicion. As if in answer, Thomas appeared from between two lodges, running toward them with Sarah following more slowly, bundled in a small fur coat that Rebecca recognized as belonging to Little Fox. Behind them came Medicine Woman and Sitting Dove, watching with the cautious expressions of those who had learned through bitter experience to expect the worst from white visitors. "Mama!" Thomas called, his face lighting with joy as he reached them. "Look what I made." He proudly displayed a small carved wooden horse, crude but recognizable. "Silent Wolf showed me how." Sarah arrived moments later, her cheeks rosy with health. "I picked berries with Sky Woman," she announced, opening her small hand to reveal a few precious dried berries. "For you, Mama." Rebecca felt tears welling as she looked from her children to the white men who had come to rescue them. The children showed no signs of fear or mistreatment. Quite the opposite. They appeared healthier and happier than they had been since before John's death. Mr. Garner's expression had shifted from suspicion to confusion as he watched the children's enthusiastic greeting. Dr. Anderson knelt to Thomas's level, examining the carved horse with appropriate admiration before checking both children with a doctor's practiced eye. Well nourished, he pronounced, a hint of surprise in his voice. No frostbite, good color. They seem remarkably well, Rebecca. Fast Eagle had stepped back, allowing this reunion and assessment without interference. Now he spoke, addressing Dr. Anderson directly. Children safe here. When woman's ankle heals, they go home if they want. Dr. Anderson considered this, then nodded slowly. A generous arrangement. He turned to Rebecca. The ankle will need at least 3 more weeks before you should attempt the journey back. The council won't like this, Mr. Garner warned, though his hostility had noticeably diminished as he watched Sarah shyly offering berries to anyone who would take one, leaving white folk with Indians. The council isn't stranded with a broken ankle and 3 children in the dead of winter. Dr. Anderson replied dryly, Sometimes, Mr. Garner, Providence works in unexpected ways. Fast Eagle gestured toward the center of the camp. Come, eat, then you go tell others children are safe. The invitation clearly made Mr. Garner uncomfortable, but Dr. Anderson accepted with dignity. We would be honored. The meal that followed marked the first deliberate breaking of bread between the people of Pinecrest and the Sioux camp. Seated in Fast Eagle's lodge, they shared a stew of rabbit and roots, the conversation halting at first, but gradually easing as Thomas enthusiastically described his adventures learning to track animals, and Sarah demonstrated the Sioux words she had mastered. Rebecca watched Dr. Anderson's face as he observed the interactions between her children and the Sioux. The elderly doctor had always possessed a wisdom that transcended the frontier prejudices, and now she could see him reassessing long-held assumptions as he saw the reality of this camp. Your medicines, he said to Medicine Woman through Fast Eagle's translation. I would be interested to learn about them. The poultice you used on Mrs. Miller's ankle, the swelling is less than I would expect. The old woman studied him with shrewd eyes before nodding slowly. Through a series of translations and gestures, she began explaining the herbs she had used, their preparation and application. Dr. Anderson listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed his respect for her knowledge. Mr. Garner remained more reserved, but even he had relaxed enough to accept a second helping of stew and to watch with obvious fascination as Silent Wolf demonstrated techniques for making fire in wet conditions. As evening approached, Fast Eagle announced it was time for the men to return to their camp. Tomorrow, he said to Rebecca, others can visit, 2 at time. No guns. Dr. Anderson nodded agreement. A reasonable precaution. I'll make sure Mayor Thompson understands the terms. Rebecca doubted the mayor would accept any terms dictated by a Sioux warrior, but she kept that concern to herself. One day at a time, that had been her mantra since John's death, and it served her well now. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Anderson took Rebecca's hand. You found yourself in an extraordinary situation, my dear. But I believe you're exactly where you and these children needed to be right now. His eyes crinkled with a gentle smile. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected quarters. After they departed, escorted by Fast Eagle and 2 other warriors, Rebecca sat with her children in Sitting Dove's lodge, reflecting on the day's developments. The confrontation she had feared had been averted, at least temporarily. Dr. Anderson would advocate for patience, and even Mr. Garner would have to admit the children were well cared for. But she harbored no illusions about the challenges ahead. Mayor Thompson and others in Pinecrest would not easily accept this arrangement, temporary though it might be. Their worldview couldn't accommodate the idea of Sioux as saviors rather than threats. And what of the Sioux themselves? While Fast Eagle's band had shown remarkable compassion, Rebecca understood they had taken a risk in rescuing white settlers. Not all tribes would make the same choice, nor would all bands within the Sioux Nation share Fast Eagle's willingness to bridge the divide between their peoples. That night, as her children slept peacefully nearby, Rebecca gazed into the lodge. Fire, and confronted a truth she had been avoiding. Their rescue had irrevocably changed her. The simple narrative of settlers versus savages that framed life in Pinecrest could never again be her reality, not after she had experienced the humanity, wisdom, and compassion of the people who had saved her family. Whatever came next, she would never see the world the same way again. Outside, the winter wind moaned around the lodge, but inside was warmth, safety, and a new understanding that would ultimately reach far beyond one family or one winter. Though Rebecca couldn't know it then, the fragile connection forged in desperation between her family and Fast Eagle's people would eventually create ripples that would change the course of relations between settlers and Sioux across the region, not through grand political gestures, but through the simple, powerful act of recognizing each other's humanity. The homestead stood silent and cold when Rebecca first returned to it, a small party of Sioux warriors accompanying her family for the journey. Snow had drifted against the north wall nearly to the roofline, and ice hung from the eaves in thick daggers that caught the morning light. The door creaked open reluctantly, revealing an interior untouched since their desperate departure weeks earlier. "It feels smaller," Emma whispered, stepping cautiously inside as if entering a stranger's home. Thomas rushed to check his collection of carved animals on the shelf by the hearth, while Sarah clung to Rebecca's skirts, suddenly shy in this once familiar space. Rebecca moved through the cabin slowly, reacquainting herself with the life they had left behind. The table John had built from pine boards during her first pregnancy. The quilt her mother had sent from Pennsylvania, now thin with age. The Bible with family births and deaths recorded in careful script. Fast Eagle remained by the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the brightness outside, an observer rather than participant in this reunion. Rebecca had invited him to enter, but he had declined with a slight shake of his head. This was their space, their moment to reconnect with the life they had temporarily left behind. Outside, Running Fox and two other warriors inspected the property with practical efficiency. They found the barn partially collapsed under the snow's weight, but the animals Rebecca had released before their desperate journey, a milk cow and 2 horses, had been taken in by neighbors. The well remained sound. The woodshed stood empty, its contents likely borrowed by passing trappers. The root cellar had frozen, ruining stored vegetables, but the smokehouse still contained some preserved meat, protected from scavengers by its tight construction. "Roof needs work," Running Fox reported, pointing to where snow had broken through the barn's aging shingles. "House good, strong build." Rebecca nodded, mentally cataloguing the tasks required to make the homestead functional again. Spring. Planting season approached rapidly, and without successful crops, they would face another winter of scarcity. The magnitude of the work ahead felt overwhelming as she stood in the doorway, watching her children rediscover their possessions with mixed emotions. "You come to decision," Fast Eagle said quietly, his voice reaching only her ears. It wasn't a question, but Rebecca answered anyway. "I need to try. This land was John's dream, our dream, the children's inheritance." Fast Eagle's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Dreams change, people change. Mayor Thompson arrived with the promised assistance later that day. Mr. Jenkins and his teenage sons with tools for repairs, Mrs. Peterson with a basket of supplies, and 2 other council members whose presence seemed designed to ensure the Sioux visitors departed promptly. The atmosphere turned immediately tense, the easy companionship of the journey giving way to stiff formality. "We'll see to the barn first," Mr. Jenkins announced, eyeing Fast Eagle and his warriors with poorly concealed suspicion. "You gentlemen needn't trouble yourselves further." Fast Eagle met Rebecca's eyes briefly, a silent communication that had developed between them during her weeks in the camp. With a slight nod, he turned to his men and spoke in their language. The warriors began preparing for departure without argument, though Running Fox cast a concerned glance at Thomas, who had become his shadow during their stay in the camp. Thompson watched the preparations with evident satisfaction. Sensible of them to head back. Now we can get you properly settled, Mrs. Miller. Rebecca felt a strange hollowness as she watched Fast Eagle secure his pack. Their parting seemed abrupt after all they had shared, yet what alternative existed? Their worlds remained separated by boundaries both physical and cultural. The brief intersection of their lives, a temporary anomaly caused by extraordinary circumstances. As the warriors prepared to leave, Thomas suddenly broke away from Emma's watchful eye and ran to Silent Wolf, throwing his arms around the young man's waist in an impulsive embrace. The warrior, startled momentarily, gently returned the gesture, then knelt to the boy's level. "Remember tracking signs?" he asked in halting English. Thomas nodded eagerly. Silent Wolf pointed to his own chest. "I visit. Check snares together." The promise visibly brightened Thomas's expression, though Rebecca noted Thompson's frown at this proposed future contact. Before the mayor could object, Rebecca stepped forward, extending her hand to Fast Eagle in the white man's gesture of farewell. "I have no words adequate for what you and your people have done for us," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Fast Eagle took her hand briefly, the contact sending an unexpected warmth through her fingers. "No words needed between friends," he replied simply. Then, with a final glance that seemed to memorize her face, he turned and led his men toward the tree line, their forms gradually disappearing into the still, snowy landscape. The following weeks passed in a blur of constant labor. The town's assistance proved genuine, if limited. The barn was made weathertight, essential supplies provided, and the loan of a plow arranged for spring planting. But the daily work of reviving the homestead fell to Rebecca and the children, a never-ending cycle of tasks that left them exhausted each night. Emma rose to the challenges with quiet determination, taking on responsibilities far beyond her years. Thomas worked alongside Rebecca in the fields, his small hands blistering on tool handles meant for a man's grip. Even Sarah contributed, feeding chickens donated by Mrs. Peterson and carefully tending the kitchen garden they had planted close to the house. Dr. Anderson visited regularly, bringing news from town along with occasional treats for the children. During one such visit, as Rebecca served tea at the kitchen table, he broached the subject of their time with the Sioux. The medicine woman's remedies proved remarkably effective during the epidemic, he said, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "I've been documenting the preparations as best I can recall them. I wonder if you might help clarify some details." Rebecca smiled, recognizing this as more than simple medical curiosity. The elderly doctor had been profoundly affected by the cooperation between the communities during the crisis, his lifelong assumptions challenged by direct evidence of the Sioux people's knowledge and compassion. "Of course," she agreed, explaining what she had learned about the herbs and preparations while assisting Medicine Woman. As they talked, Rebecca found herself speaking more broadly about Sioux life, their careful conservation of resources, their educational practices, their social structures that balanced individual skill with community needs. Dr. Anderson listened intently, occasionally making notes. "Fascinating," he murmured. "So unlike the savage caricatures Mayor Thompson and his ilk prefer to believe. The Sioux have a different way of living, not an inferior one," Rebecca said. "Their challenges are similar to ours: survival, raising children, finding meaning. But their solutions reflect generations of knowledge about this specific land." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "I've often wondered how different our settlement might have been had we approached with learning rather than conquering in mind." He sighed, closing his notebook. "Though I fear such reflections come too late." The government's policies push relentlessly westward, and men like Thompson see only obstacles to progress, not potential teachers. His words lingered with Rebecca long after he departed. The fragile connection between her family and Fast Eagle's people seemed increasingly precious as she heard reports of tensions elsewhere in the territory, disputes over hunting grounds, broken agreements, occasional violence that fed the cycle of fear and retaliation. Spring advanced into early summer, the land transformed from snow-covered stillness to vibrant growth. The fields Rebecca and the children had laboriously planted showed promising signs, though not without setbacks. A late frost had damaged some corn, and rabbits breached the garden fence repeatedly until Thomas applied tracking lessons from Silent Wolf to identify and block their entry points. The Sioux warriors kept their promise to visit, though they maintained a careful distance from the house whenever other settlers might be present. Silent Wolf taught Thomas to fish with a handcrafted spear in the creek that bordered their property. Running Fox brought Emma patterns for beadwork, along with supplies from Morning Sky. Even Medicine Woman made the journey once, bringing a special tea for Sarah when word reached the camp that the child's cough had returned with the summer's dust. These visits occurred without pattern or announcement. Yet Rebecca found herself watching the tree line each day, her pulse quickening when familiar figures emerged from the shadows. She told herself this reaction stemmed from anticipation of the practical help they often brought, game when hunting was poor, advice on preserving wild berries, assistance with repairs her slight frame struggled to manage alone. But in the privacy of nighttime reflection, Rebecca acknowledged a more personal truth. Fast Eagle's occasional presence had become necessary to her equilibrium in ways that confused and sometimes frightened her. Their conversations during his visits, though brief and often practical, resonated in her thoughts for days afterward. His perspective challenged her assumptions. His quiet strength reminded her of John's, yet distinct in ways that felt complementary to her own developing. Resilience. One evening in late June, as fireflies began their nightly display along the edge of the newly planted wheat field, Fast Eagle arrived alone. Rebecca sat on the porch steps, mending Thomas's perpetually torn trousers while the children prepared. For bed inside, his approach was silent until he deliberately snapped a twig to announce his presence, a courtesy she had come to recognize and appreciate. "The wheat grows well," he observed, remaining at a respectful distance from the house. Rebecca set aside her sewing. "Better than I expected, given my inexperience. Your advice about planting depth was valuable." Fast Eagle nodded, then gestured toward the darkening sky. "Storm comes tomorrow. Heavy rain." "I'll secure the new chicken coop," Rebecca said, grateful for the warning. Weather prediction was another skill the Sioux possessed that surpassed many settlers' abilities, based on generations of observation rather than the unreliable almanacs peddled in town. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that had developed during her weeks in the Sioux camp, a shared space that required no filling with unnecessary words. Finally, Fast Eagle spoke again, his voice carrying a new note of formality. "Council fire meeting tomorrow night. Important talk. You should come." Rebecca looked up in surprise. "Me? To a Sioux council meeting?" He nodded once. "Dr. Anderson comes too, and others who helped during sickness time." "What is the meeting about?" she asked, curiosity piqued by this unprecedented invitation. Fast Eagle's expression turned grave. "Government men come soon, with papers, talk of new boundaries, new rules. We must decide how to meet them." The significance wasn't lost on Rebecca. The government men represented the inexorable westward expansion that threatened native lands and lifeways throughout the territory. Treaties made and broken, promises offered and withdrawn. The pattern had repeated across the continent for generations. "I would be honored to attend," she said sincerely. "But why include me? I have no influence with government representatives." Fast Eagle's gaze was steady. "You have lived in both worlds now, seen with open eyes. Your words carry truth about what is possible between our peoples." The council meeting gathered the following evening in a clearing near the center of the Sioux camp. Elders sat in a semicircle around the fire, their weathered faces solemn in the flickering light. Warriors stood behind them, including Fast Eagle and his companions. Women occupied spaces to the sides, their presence less visible, but their attention no less acute. Rebecca arrived with Dr. Anderson, who had collected her in his buggy despite threatening skies. They joined a small group of settlers, positioned respectfully across from the tribal elders. The blacksmith, who had accompanied Dr. Anderson on the first visit to the camp, Mrs. Peterson, whose views had softened considerably since the epidemic, and surprisingly, the schoolteacher, Miss Abernathy, whose intellectual curiosity had apparently overcome traditional boundaries. The council began with ceremonial smoking, the sacred pipe passed among male participants in a ritual Rebecca recognized from her time in the camp. When it concluded, the eldest of the Sioux leaders spoke at length in their language, his words, then translated by a younger man who explained the purpose of this unprecedented gathering. "The Indian agent comes in one moon," the translator explained. "He brings new papers from Washington. We have heard from other Sioux bands these papers speak of smaller lands for our people, moving us away from hunting grounds our grandfathers used, putting us in one place like penned animals." Dr. Anderson nodded grimly. "Reservation policy. It's being implemented throughout the Western Territories." The elder spoke again, his hands gesturing expressively as he addressed both his people and the white visitors. "Our chief asks if there is another path," the translator continued. "If those who have broken bread with us, who have shared medicines and knowledge, might speak differently to the agent than those who see us only as obstacles." Rebecca listened as Dr. Anderson responded thoughtfully, explaining the limited influence local settlers might have on federal policy, but offering suggestions for documentation of the peaceful relations and mutual assistance between the communities. The blacksmith, Mr. Garner, spoke of economic benefits of trade rather than conflict. Miss Abernathy proposed educational exchange that might demonstrate the Sioux people's intelligence and capacity to adapt while maintaining their cultural integrity. When Rebecca's turn came, she found herself unexpectedly nervous, aware of the weight Fast Eagle had placed on her perspective as someone who had experienced both worlds. "My family owes our lives to your compassion," she began, addressing the elders directly. "What I learned living among you changed how I see the world. Your medicine saved my daughter's chronic cough when our remedies failed. Your teaching gave my son confidence he had lost when his father died. Your community showed me that different does not mean lesser." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I cannot promise to change government policy, but I can bear witness to truth. I can ensure my children grow up knowing that the stories told about Native peoples in town and in books are incomplete at best, harmful lies at worst. And I can demonstrate through my own choices that cooperation benefits both communities more than conflict ever could." The discussion continued late into the night, moving from broad principles to specific strategies for the agent's visit. Though no definitive solutions emerged, the unprecedented dialogue itself represented a remarkable departure from the suspicion that typically characterized settler-native relations. When the council fire burned low, Rebecca found herself reluctant to leave, aware that this fragile moment of understanding might not be easily replicated. As Dr. Anderson prepared the buggy for their return journey, Fast Eagle approached Rebecca, where she stood gazing into the remnants of the fire. "Your words were good," he said simply. "True words from an open heart." Rebecca smiled tiredly. "I only hope they make some difference when the agent arrives." "Difference already made," Fast Eagle replied, gesturing toward where Mr. Garner was deep in conversation with one of the Sioux elders, their discussion facilitated by a translator, but animated with genuine exchange. Small seeds grow to change, landscapes given time and care. They stood in companionable silence until Dr. Anderson called that the buggy was ready. As Rebecca turned to leave, Fast Eagle spoke again, his voice lower than before. When moon is full again, our people hold summer ceremony. Thanks for good planting season, prayers for harvest. Your family welcome to attend. The invitation carried significance beyond social pleasantry. Spiritual ceremonies remained closely guarded aspects of Sioux culture, rarely shared with outsiders. Rebecca recognized it as an extension of trust. "We would be honored," she answered sincerely. The government agent arrived precisely when predicted, a thin man named Cartwright with wire-rimmed spectacles and the perpetually dusty appearance of someone who spent too much time in stagecoaches between remote assignments. He established temporary headquarters in Pinecrest's small hotel, summoning tribal representatives and town officials for separate meetings that quickly revealed his predetermined agenda. "The department's policy is quite clear," he explained to the town council, Rebecca present as an interested citizen rather than official member. "Concentrating native populations on designated reservations benefits all parties. It allows for efficient distribution of promised supplies, enables educational and religious instruction, and most importantly, opens valuable land for productive settlement." Mayor Thompson nodded enthusiastically. "Sound reasoning, Mr. Cartwright. We've had our share of difficulties with the local tribes." "Actually," Dr. Anderson interjected, "relations with Fast Eagle's band have been remarkably peaceful. During last winter's epidemic, their medical knowledge saved many lives in this very town." Cartwright's expression registered polite skepticism. "Isolated cooperation doesn't negate the broader pattern, Doctor. The future of this territory lies in agriculture, railroads, and commerce, pursuits incompatible with nomadic lifestyles." Rebecca listened with growing frustration as the agent outlined plans that treated the Sioux as obstacles, rather than people with valid claims to land they had occupied for generations. When discussion turned to specific boundaries of the proposed reservation, located nearly 100 miles west on considerably less fertile land, she could remain silent no longer. "Mr. Cartwright," she said, straightening in her chair, "my children and I would have died last winter if not for the Sioux people you propose to relocate. They took us in when we were strangers, shared their food when they had little, and treated my broken ankle with remarkable skill. I've lived among them and can assure you they are neither savage nor incapable of adaptation." Cartwright regarded her with the condescending patience of a man accustomed to emotional protests from women. "Mrs. Miller, I understand you feel personal gratitude. However, federal policy must consider broader concerns than individual experiences." "Is justice not a broad concern?" Rebecca countered. "Is honoring agreements not fundamental to governance? The treaties signed with the Sioux guaranteed them these hunting grounds. Treaties require modification as circumstances evolve," Cartwright replied smoothly. "The department has determined that current arrangements are unsustainable given settlement patterns." The meeting concluded without resolution, though Rebecca noted that Cartwright appeared mildly discomforted by the unexpected advocacy from respected town figures like Dr. Anderson. As they departed the hotel, the doctor fell into step beside her. "You spoke well," he said quietly. "Though I fear our objections fall on predetermined policy rather than open minds." Rebecca nodded grimly. He arrived with his conclusions already written. The consultation is mere formality. "Even so," Dr. Anderson mused, "seeds of doubt have value. Cartwright must file reports. If enough voices question the wisdom of forced relocation, perhaps alternatives might emerge. But as summer advanced toward harvest, hope for such alternatives diminished. Cartwright conducted several meetings with tribal representatives, each reportedly more tense than the last. Fast Eagle, visiting the homestead to help repair storm damage to the newly constructed chicken coop, reported that government surveyors had already begun marking boundaries for the reservation. "Your agent speaks with honey words while holding a knife behind his back," he told Rebecca as they worked side by side. "Promises good houses, food delivery, payment for land. Same promises made to other bands before us. Promises like morning mist gone when sun climbs high." Rebecca passed him another shingle, their fingers briefly touching in the exchange. "What will your people do?" Fast Eagle secured the shingle with practiced movements. "Council divides on this question. Some say fight, die on our lands rather, than waste away on reservation. Others say adapt, learn white man's ways to survive in new world. Elders say wisdom lies between these paths." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers directly. "What would you do, Rebecca Miller, if strangers came to take your home because they wanted your fields?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications beyond the immediate crisis. Rebecca considered it seriously, aware that her response carried meaning beyond hypothetical philosophy. "I would seek alliance with those who recognize the injustice," she said finally. "Find ways to resist that didn't invite destruction. Change what I could accept changing while preserving what matters most, my children's well-being, my core beliefs, my dignity." Fast Eagle studied her face, seeming to find something significant in her answer, though he did not directly respond to it. Instead, he said, "Full moon comes tomorrow night. Summer ceremony begins at sunset." The invitation remained open despite the increasing tensions, a bridge extended across a widening cultural divide. As Rebecca watched him complete the repair and depart toward the tree line, she found herself contemplating choices she had never anticipated when they first returned to the homestead. The summer ceremony began as promised at sunset the following evening. The Sioux camp transformed by special preparations that had engaged the entire community for days. Central fires burned higher than usual, tended by designated keepers who added specific woods in patterns meaningful within their spiritual traditions. Elders wore ceremonial dress adorned with symbols of their status and history. Women had prepared feast foods in quantities that spoke of remarkable generosity given the uncertain future. Rebecca arrived with all 3 children dressed in their best clothing out of respect for the occasion. They received a welcome that balanced formality with genuine warmth, guided to places of honor near where tribal leaders would conduct the ceremonies. Emma whispered questions about the unfamiliar elements she observed, while Thomas watched with the rapt attention he accorded all Sioux customs. Sarah, overtired from excitement, eventually fell asleep against Rebecca's side as the night progressed. The ceremonies themselves remained partially mysterious to Rebecca, despite her time living among the Sioux. Some elements were clearly not meant for outsider understanding, conducted in the tribe's language without translation. Other portions, expressions of gratitude for successful planting, prayers for abundant harvest, recognition of children born since the previous ceremony, transcended linguistic barriers in their universal human meaning. Fast Eagle participated in specific rituals assigned to warriors of his standing, his movements precise and dignified. Occasionally his eyes met Rebecca's across the gathering, a private acknowledgement amid the public ceremony. During a break in the proceedings, as women distributed food among the participants, he made his way to where she sat with the children. "Your presence honors our ways," he said, the ceremonial formality of the evening evident in his speech. "We are grateful to witness this celebration," Rebecca replied sincerely. "It helps the children understand the depth of your people's connection to this land." Fast Eagle nodded, then lowered his voice. When moon sets, after main ceremony ends, meet me by medicine wheel if you wish to speak privately. The request was unexpected, its timing significant. Rebecca felt a flutter of anticipation as she nodded agreement, wondering what matter required such specific circumstances for discussion. The primary ceremony continued for several more hours, building toward a culmination that involved synchronized drumming and singing that raised goosebumps on Rebecca's arms despite the summer warmth. By the time it concluded, Thomas had joined Sarah in sleep, his head pillowed against Emma's shoulder. The girl looked tired but determinedly awake, her eyes still taking in every detail of the unfamiliar ritual. "We should return home," Rebecca told her, gathering Sarah into her arms as the gathering began to disperse. "It's far past your bedtime." "But Mama," Emma protested quietly, "Fast Eagle said to meet him after the ceremony." Rebecca hesitated, surprised by her daughter's observation. "You heard that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Is it important?" He looked serious. The perception of a 10-year-old could be remarkably acute, Rebecca reflected. "I think it might be," she acknowledged. "But the children need sleep, and it's a long walk back to the homestead." "We could stay," Emma suggested, a hint of hope in her voice. "Some of the women have been showing me where they keep extra bedding in the lodges. Morning Sky said once that we would always have a place here if we needed it." The simple statement carried implications that Rebecca had been carefully avoiding confronting directly. The Sioux women's continued inclusion of Emma, their teaching and sharing, represented more than casual friendship. They were keeping open a connection, maintaining space within their community for possible integration. Before Rebecca could respond, Medicine Woman approached, her keen eyes taking in the sleeping children and Rebecca's evident dilemma. With gentle gestures and the few English words she had mastered, she indicated that the children could sleep in her lodge. Emma nodded eagerly at this solution, already comfortable with the elderly healer from their previous stay in the camp. "I'll stay with them, Mama," she assured Rebecca. "Thomas won't be frightened if he wakes up with me there." With the immediate, practical concern resolved, Rebecca found herself walking alone toward the medicine wheel as the camp settled into post-ceremonial quietness. The sacred site stood on a small rise just beyond the main camp, a circular arrangement of stones with pathways oriented to cardinal directions. In daylight, Rebecca had observed it from a respectful distance during her time in the camp, aware that it served important spiritual functions within Sioux culture. Fast Eagle waited at the eastern entrance to the circle, his ceremonial attire exchanged for his everyday buckskins. The moon illuminated his features as she approached, revealing an expression of unusual solemnity, even for his typically reserved demeanor. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "Of course," Rebecca replied, curious about this unusual meeting place and time. "Is something wrong?" Fast Eagle gestured for her to walk with him along the perimeter of the medicine wheel rather than entering its sacred space. "Many things wrong," he acknowledged as they moved slowly through the moonlight. "But sometimes from wrong comes new, path never seen before." He fell silent for several steps, organizing his thoughts in the deliberate way Rebecca had come to recognize and appreciate. Finally, he continued, "My people face hard choice. Government papers now signed. In one moon, we must leave hunting grounds of our ancestors for reservation far from here." Rebecca's letter to Agent Cartwright grew longer with each evening she worked on it, the pages accumulating as she poured out the full truth of her experience with the Sioux. She described not just their rescue from certain death in the snow, but the sophisticated medical treatments that had healed her broken ankle, the educational practices that had engaged her children's minds, the sustainable hunting and gathering techniques that allowed the tribe to thrive in harmony with the land. She wrote of shared meals and cultural exchange, of wisdom passed through generations, of spiritual practices that fostered deep connection to the natural world. The final document stretched to nearly 20 pages, her handwriting growing smaller, as she fought to include every relevant detail before Cartwright's departure from the territory. When she finally signed her name at the bottom, Rebecca felt a curious lightness, as though the act of bearing witness had shifted something essential within her own understanding. Dr. Anderson collected the letter personally, his eyebrows rising at its substantial weight. Quite thorough, I see. Truth deserves thoroughness, Rebecca replied simply. Will he read it? The doctor tucked the document carefully into his satchel. He's obligated to include citizen testimony in his reports. Whether the contents influence policy depends on many factors beyond our control. He studied her face for a moment. Have you reached any conclusions about Fast Eagle's proposal? Rebecca glanced toward the fields where Thomas worked alongside Silent Wolf, learning to identify plants that could be harvested without disrupting their growth cycle. Near the garden, Sarah played with two Sioux children who had accompanied their mothers on a visit to exchange seeds. The boundaries between their worlds had already grown permeable, she realized, the transformation beginning long before Fast Eagle had named the possibility. I believe I have, she told the doctor quietly, though I'm still gathering courage for what comes next. The opportunity to act on her decision arrived sooner than Rebecca had anticipated. 2 days later, Mayor Thompson appeared at the homestead, his horse lathered from hard riding despite the summer heat. His expression as he dismounted carried the satisfaction of a man bringing news he expected to be well received. Mrs. Miller, he greeted her, removing his hat as she met him on the porch. I've come with excellent tidings. The council has approved my proposal regarding your situation. Rebecca offered water for both man and horse, frontier courtesy superseding her wariness. What proposal might that be, Mayor? I wasn't aware my situation required council attention. Thompson accepted the water but waved away her invitation to sit. We've been concerned about your vulnerability out here alone, especially with these Indian troubles. He gestured vaguely toward the distant Sioux camp. The reservation removal will leave dangerous elements at large, at least temporarily. Fast Eagle's people have shown nothing but kindness to my family, Rebecca noted, keeping her tone neutral despite the familiar stirring of indignation. Perhaps so, Thompson conceded impatiently. But that's beside the point. The council has agreed to purchase your homestead at a fair price, enough to establish you comfortably in town. Jenkins has space in his boarding house until more permanent arrangements can be made. The implication hung unspoken but clear. Those more permanent arrangements likely involved marriage to one of Pinecrest's widowers or bachelors, integration into proper town society, and the end of Rebecca's independent management of her family's affairs. That's certainly an unexpected offer, she said carefully. May I ask what prompted this sudden generosity? Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Merely concern for a widow and 3 fatherless children, Mrs. Miller. The upcoming Indian removal makes this an opportune moment for re-evaluating isolated homesteads. Rebecca recognized the evasion for what it was. With Washington representatives in the territory reviewing settlement patterns, Pinecrest's leadership wanted to present a picture of orderly development and proper social arrangements. A woman successfully managing a homestead alone, and worse, maintaining friendly relations with the Sioux, complicated that narrative. I appreciate the council's concern, Rebecca said, choosing her words deliberately, but I must decline. This land was my husband's dream for our children's future. I intend to honor that vision. Thompson's expression hardened, the pretense of benevolent concern falling away. I strongly urge you to reconsider, Mrs. Miller. The territory grows, more dangerous by the day. The agent's reports will determine military deployments and reservation boundaries. This is no time for a woman alone to take unnecessary risks. I assure you, Mayor Thompson, my decisions involve careful consideration of risks. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Please convey my gratitude to the council for their offer, but my answer remains firm. Andre, after Thompson's departure, Rebecca found herself trembling slightly as the full implications of her refusal settled over her. She had effectively rejected not just a financial transaction, but the social safety net Pinecrest might have provided. The path forward now led inevitably toward the alternative Fast Eagle had proposed, a new kind of community bridging cultural boundaries, with all its attendant challenges and uncertainties. That evening, Rebecca gathered her children after supper, their curious faces illuminated by lamplight as they sensed the importance of the conversation to come. Even Sarah, not yet 6, sat quietly attentive as Rebecca explained the changes. They were considering. Fast Eagle has asked us to join with his family, she said simply. Not to become fully Sioux, but to create something new, a place where both ways of living can exist together, where Thomas can learn tracking and reading, where Emma can study both beadwork and mathematics, where Sarah can grow up knowing the value of different kinds of wisdom. Thomas's face lit immediately with excitement. Would Silent Wolf be there? And Little Fox? Yes, Rebecca confirmed. Several families from Fast Eagle's band would establish a settlement near our creek, close enough for daily interaction, but maintaining their own living arrangements. Emma, predictably, had more complex questions. Would we still go to church in town? Would I still have my books? We would keep the practices and belongings that matter to us, Rebecca assured her, and we would learn new practices that might enrich our understanding. The point isn't to abandon who we are, but to grow beyond limitations others might impose. Would Fast Eagle be like a new papa? Sarah asked, her young mind going directly to the personal implications. Rebecca took a deep breath, having anticipated but still finding herself unprepared for the directness of the question. Fast Eagle would become part of our family, yes. Not replacing your father. No one could ever do that. But creating a new kind of family that honors your father's memory while embracing a different future than we might have imagined. The children absorbed this information with varying reactions. Thomas with undisguised enthusiasm, Sarah with simple acceptance, and Emma with thoughtful consideration that Rebecca had come to recognize as her eldest processing complex emotions. People in town will say unkind things, Emma said finally, like they did when the Petersons' daughter married that cattle driver from Texas. Yes, Rebecca acknowledged, respecting her daughter's perception. Some will. We would need to be strong together when that happens. But Dr. Anderson wouldn't, Thomas interjected confidently. And Mrs. Peterson brings us cookies even though other ladies stopped visiting. Rebecca smiled at his assessment. You're right. We would still have friends who see beyond differences, and we would gain new connections through Fast Eagle's community. The conversation continued as the children raised questions and concerns ranging from practical matters like housing arrangements to deeper worries about identity and belonging. Through it all, Rebecca answered with honesty, acknowledging uncertainties, while emphasizing the potential for creating something meaningful precisely because it challenged established boundaries. When the children finally retired to bed, Emma lingered behind, her expression serious beyond her years. "Mama," she said, quietly, "I think you should do what makes your heart feel right. Thomas and Sarah and I will be okay as long as we're together." The simple wisdom from her 10-year-old daughter brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. She pulled Emma into a tight embrace, marveling at the resilience children could demonstrate when given space to process change honestly. "Thank you, Emma," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud of the young woman you're becoming." The following day dawned clear and warm, a perfect late summer morning that seemed to reflect Rebecca's newfound clarity. She sent Thomas to the Sioux camp with a message for Fast Eagle, requesting a meeting at the creek that marked the boundary between their properties, a symbolically appropriate location for the conversation to come. As Rebecca waited by the water's edge, watching sunlight dance across the surface in golden ripples, she felt a curious absence of the anxiety that had plagued her deliberations for weeks. The way forward remained challenging and uncertain, but the decision itself had settled into rightness within her mind and heart. Fast Eagle arrived alone, his approach deliberately noisy to announce his presence. He wore everyday buckskins rather than ceremonial attire, his hair simply braided, his manner carrying the quiet dignity Rebecca had come to associate with him regardless of circumstances. "Thomas said you wished to speak," he said, remaining standing a respectful distance away. Rebecca gestured to a fallen log nearby. "Please, sit with me. I have much to say." As they settled side by side, the creek murmuring before them, Rebecca gathered her thoughts. "Mayor Thompson came yesterday with an offer to buy my homestead. The town council wants me safely established in Pinecrest, away from Indian troubles, as he put it." Fast Eagle's expression remained neutral. "What answer did you give?" "I refused," Rebecca said simply. "Not just because the offer undervalued John's work, or because it came with unspoken expectations about my future choices. I refused because I've come to see another possibility, the one you described at the medicine wheel." She turned slightly to face him more directly. "I believe in what you proposed, a community that draws wisdom from both worlds without requiring either to disappear. A place where children like Thomas and Emma and Sarah can grow up with broader understanding than either of our peoples typically allows." Fast Eagle remained silent, his dark eyes intent on her face as she continued. "My children and I have discussed what this would mean," she explained. "The challenges from both sides, the adjustments we would all need to make. They understand this path won't be easy, but they also see its value." "And you?" Fast Eagle asked quietly. "What does Rebecca Miller see for herself on this path?" The directness of the question required equal honesty in response. "I see partnership instead of isolation. I see learning instead of merely surviving. I see the possibility of companionship I had resigned myself to living without." She took a deep breath. "I see you, Fast Eagle, and the kind of man you are. Honorable, thoughtful, and brave enough to imagine something that has never existed before." For the first time since she had known him, Fast Eagle's composure showed cracks as emotion flickered across his features. He reached slowly to take her hand, the contact sending warmth up her arm despite the summer heat. "My people have word," he said, his voice low and intense. "Hochichiapi. It means to commit to one another in sacred ways, different from white marriage, but same in things that matter most: respect, care, building life together." He paused, his thumb moving gently across her knuckles. "This is what I offer to you and your children. Not to replace memories of your husband, but to create new memories that honor what came before while looking toward what could be." The Sioux word lingered between them, its unfamiliar syllables somehow capturing the essence of what they were. Contemplating, a commitment based not on legal documents or social conventions, but on mutual recognition and deliberate choice. "Yes," Rebecca said simply, the syllable carrying the weight of worlds shifting. "Yes to Hochichiapi, yes to building something new together." Fast Eagle's rare smile transformed his face, years seeming to fall away as he gently squeezed her. "And then we begin. Not easy path, but good path." The practical aspects of their decision took shape rapidly in the following days. Fast Eagle selected 4 families from his band who were most amenable to the experimental settlement, those with skills complementary to farming, with children near the ages of Rebecca's, with temperaments suited to navigating cultural boundaries. Together, they identified a site near the creek where natural features provided shelter and defense while allowing access to both hunting grounds and arable land. Word of the arrangement reached Pinecrest through Dr. Anderson, who had become something of an intermediary between the communities. Reactions ranged from outrage to confused curiosity, with Mayor Thompson predictably among the most vocal opponents. "This undermines the entire reservation policy," he protested during an emergency council meeting. "If Indians can simply decide to establish unauthorized settlements wherever they please, what's the point of government directives?" Dr. Anderson had calmly pointed out that no laws explicitly prohibited peaceful settlement on unclaimed land adjacent to existing homesteads, particularly when invited by the homesteader in question. "Mrs. Miller retains rights to determine who may utilize portions of her property," he reminded the council, "and the land beyond her boundaries remains open territory until formal titles are registered." While the legal debate continued in town, Rebecca and Fast Eagle proceeded with their plans. The Sioux families began constructing traditional teepee on the designated land, though with modifications for more permanent habitation than their fully nomadic practices had required. Rebecca and her children worked alongside them, learning techniques for securing the structures against prairie winds, while sharing their knowledge of food preservation for the coming winter. Emma, initially the most reserved about the arrangement, gradually found herself drawn to Morning Sky's patient teaching of beadwork and herbal knowledge. The Sioux woman had lost her own daughter to fever years earlier, and the growing bond between them provided healing neither had anticipated. Thomas thrived under the combined mentorship of Silent Wolf and Fast Eagle, his natural affinity for outdoor skills blossoming as he learned to move through the landscape with growing confidence. His reading had previously lagged behind other children his age, but Rebecca observed with interest that as his self-assurance grew in tracking and hunting, his willingness to tackle written language improved correspondingly. Sarah adapted with the remarkable plasticity of very young children, moving between Sioux playmates and her siblings with equal comfort, absorbing words from both languages with the effortless acquisition only early childhood permits. She developed particularly close attachment to Sitting Dove, Fast Eagle's mother, who delighted in teaching the little girl traditional songs and stories. The ceremony that formalized Rebecca and Fast Eagle's union took place as autumn painted, the landscape in russet and gold. Neither fully Sioux nor fully Christian in its elements, it represented instead a thoughtful blending of traditions that honored both heritages while creating something uniquely their own. Dr. Anderson attended, along with Mrs. Peterson and the school teacher, Miss Abernathy, the only representatives from Pinecrest willing to publicly associate with such an unconventional arrangement. The Sioux presence was larger, including not just the families who had joined the Creek settlement, but representatives from the main band who had not yet departed for the reservation. Rebecca wore a dress of simple white cotton, adorned with beaded accents Emma and Morning Sky had worked on together in secret. Fast Eagle dressed in a combination of traditional elements and items traded from settlers, the blend visual representation of the bridge they sought to build between worlds. The ceremony incorporated prayers from both traditions, a symbolic exchange of meaningful gifts and vows spoken in both English and Lakota. When Rebecca placed her hands between Fast Eagle's in the Sioux tradition of commitment, she felt a profound sense of rightness despite the unprecedented nature of their union. "Two streams join to make stronger river," Fast Eagle said softly as they completed the ceremonial steps. "Not losing what they were, but becoming something more together." The small settlement at the creek took shape as winter approached. The 7 dwellings, Rebecca's cabin and 6 Sioux households, arranged in a semicircle that provided mutual protection while maintaining family privacy. A central area emerged, naturally for communal activities, including a fire pit larger than individual family needs would require. They established shared protocols that respected both cultures' practices, Sioux traditions of resource distribution that ensured no family went without basic necessities, alongside settler approaches to property that allowed for individual initiative and innovation. Children received education that incorporated both written learning from Rebecca's books and experiential knowledge from Sioux elders. The first true test of their experimental community came from neither cultural conflicts nor external opposition, but from nature itself. November brought an early blizzard that swept across the prairie with devastating force, trapping everyone within their dwellings for 3 days as snow piled against walls and temperatures plummeted. When they finally emerged, they discovered damage to food stores and livestock shelters that threatened their winter survival. Without hesitation, the entire settlement mobilized to address the crisis. Sioux hunters venturing out despite dangerous conditions to secure game, women combining preserved foods to create communal meals that stretched limited resources, men working together to repair structures with techniques drawn from both traditions. Rebecca found herself in the central lodge, one evening surrounded by all the families as they shared a meal made from combined stores. The firelight illuminated faces from both cultural backgrounds, conversations flowing between languages as children played together and adults discussed preparations for the winter ahead. Fast Eagle sat beside her, their shoulders touching in, the comfortable familiarity that had developed between them. "Look," he said quietly, gesturing around the circle. "This is the vision becoming real. Not perfect, still learning, but real." Rebecca followed his gaze, seeing what he indicated. Thomas demonstrating a reading lesson to little Fox, while the Sioux boy reciprocated by showing a tracking technique using small pebbles as markers. Emma and Morning Sky working side by side, their hands moving in complementary rhythms as they repaired damaged clothing. Sarah falling asleep in Sitting Dove's lap as the elderly woman hummed a traditional lullaby. "It is real," Rebecca agreed, a lump forming in her throat at the simple beauty of the scene, "more real than I dared hope." Word of their successful weathering of the early storm reached Pinecrest through Dr. Anderson's regular visits. The doctor had maintained his medical practice among both communities, bringing news and serving as unofficial diplomat between increasingly divergent worldviews. "Interesting developments in the territory," he informed Rebecca and Fast Eagle during one such visit in early December. "Agent Cartwright's preliminary reports have been reviewed in Washington. It seems your detailed letter made an impression." "Rebecca," he explained, that while the reservation policy remained officially unchanged, exceptions were being considered for demonstrably integrated settlements showing agricultural development and peaceful coexistence. The bureaucratic language disguised what amounted to a potential reprieve. If their Creek community could demonstrate success through the winter, they might receive formal recognition that would prevent forced relocation. "They want evidence of permanence," Dr. Anderson explained. "Structures, cultivated fields, formal educational arrangements for the children." He removed a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I've taken the liberty of drafting a development plan that would satisfy the requirements while maintaining the cultural flexibility you've established." The document outlined a compromise approach, designated plots for farming combined with preserved hunting territories, structured learning periods for children that incorporated both written and traditional knowledge, and governance protocols that recognized both individual families and collective decision-making. "This still requires us to change," Fast Eagle observed after studying the proposal. "Become more like settlers in ways government can measure." Yes, Dr. Anderson acknowledged, but it also preserves core elements of Sioux culture that would be lost on the reservation, and it creates space for settler practices to be enriched by Sioux wisdom about this specific land. Rebecca considered the implications carefully. It's not perfect, she admitted, but perhaps it's a beginning, a foothold for something that could grow beyond these compromises over time. As winter settled fully over the prairie, the Creek settlement established rhythms that reflected their unique position between worlds. Morning prayers incorporated elements from both spiritual traditions, spoken in both languages. Work was divided, according to skill rather than rigid cultural roles, with Rebecca learning to prepare hides alongside Sioux women while Fast Eagle mastered techniques for reinforcing the cabin's walls against prairie winds. The children moved most easily between the cultural frameworks, creating games that blended elements from both backgrounds, developing vocabulary that switched fluidly between languages, establishing friendships that acknowledged differences, while finding common ground in universal childhood experiences. Christmas approached with its own set of cultural negotiations. Rebecca wished to maintain the holiday traditions that connected her children to their father's memory and their heritage, while respecting that the Sioux families did not share this religious framework. After thoughtful discussion among the adults, they developed an approach that honored the significance of midwinter celebrations in both traditions. The settlement gathered in the central area on Christmas Eve, the space decorated with evergreen boughs and illuminated by carefully preserved candles. Rebecca read the Nativity story from her family Bible, explaining its significance to those unfamiliar with the narrative. Afterward, Sitting Dove shared traditional Sioux winter solstice stories that spoke of renewal and the eventual return of spring after darkness. The children exchanged simple gifts created from available materials, carved wooden animals, beaded bracelets, drawings made with precious hoarded paper and charcoal. The adults contributed to a communal feast that incorporated elements from both culinary traditions, creating new flavor combinations that reflected their blended community. As Rebecca looked around the gathering, Fast Eagle's arm warm around her shoulders, she realized they had created something unprecedented on the frontier. Not perfect assimilation, not rigid separation, but genuine cultural exchange that maintained essential identities while allowing for growth and adaptation. Thomas approached, proudly displaying a small bow Silent Wolf had helped him craft, his face alight with accomplishment. Emma sat deep in conversation with Dr. Anderson about a book he had brought from his personal library, her intellectual curiosity finding nourishment despite their remote location. Sarah slept peacefully in a cradle board Sitting Dove had constructed, adorned with both traditional Sioux designs and the Miller family's Christian cross, visible symbols of their unprecedented journey. "We have made good beginning, Fast Eagle," said quietly, following her gaze around their gathered community. "Hard winter still ahead, many challenges to face, but the path opens before us where none existed before." Rebecca leaned slightly against his strength, watching snowflakes begin to fall beyond the circle of light from their central fire. "We will face those challenges together," she replied with quiet certainty. "And perhaps, in our small way, show that different peoples can find common ground without losing what makes them unique." The snow increased outside, but within their circle, warmth and light remained, symbolic of the flame they had kindled between worlds, a beacon illuminating possibilities beyond the rigid boundaries others sought to enforce. Their story had no neat ending, no final resolution, only the continuing journey of creating something new from the wisdom of ancient traditions and the courage to imagine a different future than history might have predicted. 5 winters had passed since that fateful blizzard when Rebecca and her children had faced certain death in the unforgiving snow. The Creek settlement, once a desperate experiment born from crisis, had grown into a thriving community with its own distinctive character. What began with a handful of families now included 14 households, 8 Sioux families, and 6 settler families who had joined after hearing about their unusual arrangement. The territorial legislature had recently granted them official recognition as Harmony Creek Township, the first settlement in the territory with a legally recognized governance structure that incorporated both Sioux and settler traditions. The path to this recognition had been fraught with political complications, skepticism from authorities, and occasional hostility from neighboring communities, uncertain how to categorize their unprecedented arrangement. On a crisp autumn morning, Rebecca stood in the doorway of her home, watching the community awakening to a new day. The original cabin remained at the core, but additions incorporating both settler construction techniques and Sioux design principles had transformed it into something unique, a physical manifestation of the cultural synthesis they had created. Thomas, now 14, headed toward the central area where several young men gathered for a hunting expedition. His easy confidence moving between cultural worlds reflected the remarkable journey their family had undertaken. He carried a rifle his settler grandfather had owned, alongside tracking tools Silent Wolf had helped him craft, embodying the integration their community represented. Emma, at 16, had become the settlement's unofficial record keeper, her natural intelligence flourishing in their unique educational environment. She had recently been corresponding with an educational reformer in Boston who had expressed interest in their approaches to cross-cultural learning. Her ability to articulate the settlement's philosophy had attracted attention far beyond the territory. Even Sarah, who had been barely 5 during that desperate winter, had blossomed into a bright 10-year-old equally comfortable speaking Dakota with her Sioux playmates or English with settler children. Having known no other life than their blended community, she moved between cultural frameworks with natural fluidity adults could only partially achieve. Fast Eagle emerged from the trading post that served as the settlement's connection to outside commerce, his bearing still carrying the dignity that had impressed Rebecca from their earliest encounters. The years had softened some of his warrior edges, replacing them with the quiet authority of a community leader whose vision had created something unprecedented on the frontier. "Commissioner Ellis arrives today," he noted, joining Rebecca at the doorway. "Dr. Anderson's letter says he brings officials from Washington." The approaching visit carried significant implications. Commissioner Ellis represented the Bureau of Indian Affairs' newest approach to territorial management, a reformist faction gaining influence in Washington that sought alternatives to the failed reservation policies of previous administrations. Their settlement had attracted attention as a potential model for more humane approaches to cultural coexistence. "The children have prepared their demonstration," Rebecca replied, referring to the educational presentation their students had developed to showcase their unique learning approaches. "And the council has organized the documentation he requested." By midday, the government delegation arrived, 5 men on horseback, led by Commissioner Ellis, a surprisingly young man whose reputation for progressive thinking had preceded him. Dr. Anderson accompanied them, his elderly figure now bent with age, but his mind still sharp as he continued advocating for the settlement he had supported from its inception. "Mrs. Fast Eagle," the commissioner greeted Rebecca formally as he dismounted. "Mr. Fast Eagle, Washington has heard remarkable things about your community. I've come to see for myself whether the reports are accurate or merely frontier exaggeration." The day unfolded through carefully planned demonstrations of the settlement's achievements. The school children presented lessons that integrated written knowledge with traditional skills. moving fluidly between languages as they explained concepts from both cultural frameworks. The Agricultural Committee showcased harvest yields that consistently exceeded territorial averages through combined approaches to farming. Most compelling were the health statistics Dr. Anderson had meticulously documented over the years. Lower disease rates than comparable communities, successful integration of traditional medicine with modern techniques, and notably positive outcomes for children's development when measured against standard metrics. Impressive by any standard, Commissioner Ellis acknowledged as they gathered for a council meeting that afternoon. But what interests Washington most is understanding how you've overcome the cultural conflicts that plague other regions. How have you created functional integration where others see only irreconcilable differences? The council members exchanged glances before Morning Sky, now a respected elder within the community, offered her perspective. We began by recognizing that each tradition contains wisdom the other lacks. Sioux understanding of this specific land paired with settler technologies. Our knowledge of plants and seasons complementing their systems of record-keeping and mechanization. Mr. Peterson, one of the first settler farmers to join the community, added practical context. We established principles rather than rigid structures, respect for both approaches, willingness to adapt where necessary without demanding complete surrender of identity, practical results valued over abstract ideologies. Fast Eagle's contribution cut to the heart of their philosophy. Children learn both ways from earliest age, not forced to choose between worlds but encouraged to draw strength from both. They grow seeing possibilities where others see only barriers. As evening approached, the commissioner requested a private conversation with Rebecca and Fast Eagle as the community prepared for a celebratory feast honoring their visitors. They walked together along the creek that had given their settlement its name, the autumn sunlight glinting off water that symbolically connected rather than divided their two worlds. Washington remains divided on Indian policy, Ellis explained candidly. Hardliners still advocate complete assimilation or isolation on reservations, but a growing faction recognizes those approaches have failed to produce either justice or practical results. He gestured toward their thriving community visible in the distance. What you've created here offers a third path few had imagined possible. It hasn't been without challenges, Rebecca acknowledged. Cultural misunderstandings still occur. External pressures constantly test our resolve. Each family must find their own balance between traditions. Yet you've persisted where most would have abandoned the experiment, Ellis observed. What sustains this community through those challenges? Fast Eagle considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Shared purpose stronger than differences. Recognition that children deserve better future than conflict their parents inherited. Practical needs that neither tradition alone satisfies completely. Rebecca added, and relationships formed through genuine understanding rather than superficial. Accommodation. Our community works because people truly know each other across cultural boundaries, not as abstract categories, but as individuals with shared hopes and complementary knowledge. The commissioner nodded slowly, his expression suggesting deeper comprehension than they had initially anticipated. I'll be direct about my purpose here. Secretary Wilkinson has authorized a pilot program based on your settlement's approach. 5 locations throughout the Western Territories where similar integrated communities might be established with federal support rather than opposition. The significance of this revelation was momentous. What had begun as desperate survival in a snowstorm, transformed into experimental community through necessity and vision, might now influence national policy affecting thousands of lives across multiple territories. These communities would not be identical to yours, Ellis cautioned. Each would reflect specific local circumstances, tribal traditions, and settler populations. But your core principles, cultural respect, integrated education, flexible governance, practical cooperation, would provide the foundation. That evening, as the settlement gathered for the feast, Rebecca watched the comfortable intermingling of people from backgrounds that elsewhere remained rigidly separated. Sioux elders conversed with settler families about upcoming weather patterns and harvest preparations. Children from both heritage groups performed songs they had created together that incorporated elements from multiple traditions. Young couples, whose marriages bridged cultural boundaries, discussed aspirations for their mixed heritage children. Commissioner Ellis observed it all with evident fascination, occasionally making notes or asking questions that revealed genuine interest rather than bureaucratic assessment. When the formal meal concluded, he addressed the gathered community with unexpected warmth. "What you have built here represents something profound in our nation's development," he told them. "Not the erasure of difference that some demand, nor the permanent separation others believe inevitable, but thoughtful integration that preserves essential identities while creating something new from their interaction." He raised his cup in a gesture that encompassed the entire settlement. "Washington will be watching what grows from the seeds you've planted here. And while government policy moves slowly, be assured that your community has already begun changing. How some of us understand what's possible on this frontier." Later that night, after the visitors had retired to lodgings prepared for them, Rebecca and Fast Eagle stood together outside their home, the autumn stars brilliant overhead. Their children slept peacefully within, Thomas dreaming perhaps of the hunting skills Silent Wolf had promised to teach him, Emma likely contemplating the educational theories she had discussed with the commissioner, Sarah surrounded by objects from both cultural heritages that formed her integrated world. 5 years ago, Rebecca said softly, when you found us in that snowstorm, could you have imagined this moment? Fast Eagle shook his head, a rare smile softening his features. The Sioux have saying, "Mitakuye oyasing," we are all related. I understood these words before, but now I see their deeper truth. Different peoples can find connection that honors both paths while creating new one together. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps, Dr. Anderson making his way carefully through the evening darkness, his aging body requiring the walking stick Thomas had carved for him last winter. "Don't mind me disturbing your evening," he said as he joined them, "but I thought you should know. Commissioner Ellis has asked me to help draft the formal framework for the pilot communities. He wants your settlement documented as the foundational model." The implications were momentous yet humbling. Their personal journey, beginning with near tragedy and transforming through compassion, vision, and perseverance, would potentially influence the lives of countless others throughout the expanding territories. "Tell him we're willing to share what we've learned," Rebecca replied, after exchanging a glance with Fast Eagle. "Both our successes and our struggles. The path isn't easy, but it offers possibilities neither tradition could achieve alone." As Dr. Anderson departed, Rebecca and Fast Eagle remained beneath the vast prairie sky, contemplating the unexpected trajectory that had brought them to this moment. The desperate mother fighting for her children's survival could never have imagined the community that would emerge from that crisis. The Sioux warrior acting from compassion during a winter hunt could not have foreseen the settlement that would grow from that single decision. Yet here they stood, surrounded by a thriving community that defied conventional wisdom about cultural boundaries. Their children represented living embodiment of possibilities neither culture had fully imagined before their paths crossed in that fateful blizzard. The creek that had given their settlement its name continued flowing nearby, its waters merging elements from diverse sources into something that retained echoes of its origins while creating its own distinctive path forward. nature's perfect metaphor for the community they had built together. Vast Eagle's arms slipped around Rebecca's shoulders, their bodies naturally finding the comfortable closeness that had developed over years of shared challenges and triumphs. "Long journey from snowstorm," he observed quietly. "But good path, even when difficult." Rebecca nodded, leaning slightly against his strength as they gazed at the settlement that had grown from their once unimaginable union. "The best paths often begin where we least expect them," she replied. "In moments of greatest vulnerability, when compassion opens doors we never knew existed." The night wrapped around them like a protective blanket, stars witnessing the continuation of a story that had begun in desperate crisis, yet blossomed into something neither culture alone could have created, a testament to the remarkable possibilities that emerge when different traditions meet, not in conflict, but in recognition of their shared humanity and complementary wisdom. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.